Hey everyone, my name is Mr. K, and if you don't know me, I'm a 7th grade English teacher and currently responsible for the tag department of our 7th grade as well. I'm here to bring you our first lesson in our philosophy course. And there are a couple things that I want to address before we get into this because I think it's going to be important that you enter this with the right expectations. So the first thing I want to address is the pace of this course. There's a lot that we're going to cover, and we're going to cover it very, very quickly. I'm trying to condense a lot of information into a very short amount of time, and you just need to be aware of that as we go through this. I'm not trying to turn you into a professional philosopher. I'm just trying to give you an overview. Now, the other thing that I want to talk about is the difficulty of the course. Some of you, if you choose to take this course, are going to find it quite difficult. And it's not because you lack the intelligence to do it or because you're not smart enough, but simply because you're probably not used to dealing with this type of content. It's not a particularly easy thing to just jump into. A lot of the ideas might seem foreign to you, and I just want you to be aware of that. So don't give up, don't stress out. If you have questions, feel free to email me, and I think we're going to be just fine. The other thing that I want to talk about is the course schedule. As I receive input from you guys or from other faculty, I'm going to be adjusting things, maybe moving at a faster pace, perhaps moving at a slower pace. So just be willing to be a little fast and loose with it. So if you're ready to drink from a fire hose, as people say, we can kind of jump into it. And we're going to talk about the intro to philosophy. And it says that we're going to be talking about the history of reason and the classical trivium. So what we're going to be talking about in this particular lesson is going to focus more on philosophy as a general idea. And then I'm going to make a brief little aside about the trivium at the end. So with that said, let's go ahead and jump into it, okay? So before we jump into any of these slides, I do want to say that these slides are written really more for me to keep track of what I want to tell you. You're free to go over them and read along with them as we talk about the different subjects, but just be aware that I might use language that you might not be familiar with. I'll try to define that as we go along if I talk about it at all. So with that in mind, what is philosophy? Merriam-Webster, which is where every good teacher starts, defines philosophy as the study of ideas about knowledge, truth, the nature, and the meaning of life. It's quite vague. I think what most people think about philosophy is they think of a bunch of old men sitting around a table talking about nonsense. Things that don't really pertain to the everyday world. That's what people think philosophy is, but hopefully you're going to find that philosophy is so much more than that, that it's not just for a bunch of old men, but it's for everybody. In fact, philosophy is really just thinking critically about questions that matter. Obviously, some philosophers take it too far and they ask questions like, do clouds really exist? But at the heart of philosophy is just trying to figure out what really matters in life, what is important for people to know. So if philosophy is just thinking critically about questions that matter, I would say that everyone does philosophy to a certain extent. Some do it better than others, some do it more often than others, but everyone does philosophy. It's very difficult to go through life and never think about questions that matter, like, why am I here? What is the purpose of this life? Is it wrong to do this? Should I be doing this with my life? These are questions that you have also encountered. And you'll continue to encounter them as you go through your life. These are philosophical questions. So, the very fact that you have beliefs about things like what's real, the fact that you have values, the fact that you have an idea of what is good, what is bad, that's a testament to the fact that throughout your life you have been philosophizing, that you have been a practicing philosopher to some extent. Or perhaps you've just been accepting the philosophies of people around you. And in this course, I'm going to persuade you that that is not always the best idea. I'm not going to be trying to persuade you of my own views. I'm not going to be trying to persuade you of other people's views, but hopefully I'm going to give you the tools to form your own views, have your own philosophy, or at least look into your philosophy enough to know that you trust it. So to give you a more developed definition of philosophy, when people talk about taking a philosophy course in college, what they're talking about is a course that brings together all of the history of famous thinkers that has shaped the world. And in America, we typically talk about Western philosophy, or thinkers that have affected the Western world of which we are a part. So those are two kind of ways that we can look at philosophy. We can look at it as deep critical thinking about things that matter, or if you talk to somebody about taking a philosophy course, you're simply talking about the history of influential thought. So we're going to address both of those things as we continue through the course, but just keep those in mind. We've talked about what philosophy is, but what does it have to do with you and why does it matter? Well, we're already being philosophers, whether or not we're actually coming up with our own philosophies or whether we're simply accepting the thoughts of others, they inform our decisions. So if you're already philosophizing and it's affecting your life, why wouldn't you want to do it well? Why wouldn't you want to do it better? Another great reason to practice philosophy is for the sake of being reasonable. I don't think anybody wants to go through life as being thought of as unreasonable, but among philosophers, it's generally understood that the vast majority of people live their entire lives without actually giving any deep thought to how reasonable their beliefs are. In fact, a lot of people possess views which are what philosophers call mutually inconsistent. That is, they can't go together, they don't fit together. Perhaps a difficult but rather appropriate example of mutually inconsistent views, back in the early days of America, we held beliefs of things like all men are created equal and endowed or given rights that can't be taken away, that are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And yet, our forefathers also held slavery as a valid option for dealing with human beings. I don't want to get into the nitty-gritty of racism. That's not what this class is about. But I do want you to understand that having inconsistent views can be extremely bad for your life and for the lives of people around you. Now, it's easy to say, well, we're more intelligent than them. We've lived at a later age. We understand things that they don't understand, but that's such a dangerous trap. Every generation is filled with people who think that everything they do is right. And then a new generation comes along and we discover, hey, maybe this generation didn't have everything right. But by being more of a philosopher, by examining our thoughts, we can hopefully prevent ourselves from falling into those same traps. And you better believe that there were people back in the 1700s who understood that there is something inconsistent about slavery and all people being born with rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Those were the good philosophers of the time. So hopefully this course is going to be a great starting point for you. You'll find value in it and you will start examining your life, what you think, as well as others' lives and what they think. Not to form some sort of judgment against other people, but rather to try to live your life as wisely as you can. That's the practical reason for looking into philosophy, logic, and rhetoric. So my English teacher talks about critical thinking, but this philosophy thing doesn't really seem worth it. What's in it for me, Mr. K? Well, I think I've presented you with some pretty good reasons that hopefully motivate your heart to pursue philosophy and logic. But if you need more than that, I've got a couple of outside things too. Reason number one, American public schools don't really teach logic or philosophy. We focus on things that are more concrete. We focus on science, technology, engineering, mathematics, We focus on reading and arithmetic, and in our reading classes, we throw a little bit of critical thinking in there. But the idea of learning logic and philosophy as a study is largely absent from American public school. So, by learning this, by pursuing this, you're going to make yourself a part of a very select group of people with very specialized knowledge, and that can have a lot of good benefits for you later on in life. Number two is that you're going to learn how to construct arguments that are bulletproof compared to arguments that you may be constructing now. And then reason number three is that having an understanding of philosophy and the critical thinking that goes along with it is going to set you up for success. So a quick aside, when I was in university, I was a assistant to a professor of literature. And as an assistant, I got to do a lot of things. I got to do book reviews and critique major authors from all around the world. I got to grade other students' essays, and I learned something in that process. There is a fairly clear difference in the ability to reason of people who have learned philosophy to some extent and those who have not. Have you ever wanted to become a lawyer? That might seem like a silly question, but if that's ever been on your list of things to do, it's worth noting that philosophy majors have some of the highest pass rates of the bar exam, which is the exam that you need to take at the end of your college coursework to become a lawyer, to be licensed as a lawyer in the United States. And it's significantly higher. In fact, they have more people passing out of philosophy majors than criminal justice majors or pre-law majors. So if you're thinking about becoming a lawyer, you'd be better off studying philosophy than studying law. So where did philosophy as a study come from? Well, as far as Western philosophy goes, it all started in Greece. Now, philosophy has always been incredibly inclusive of other disciplines, things like psychology, politics, theology, sociology, if you know any of those, or if you don't know them, go ahead and look them up. So what sort of role does philosophy play in history and society in our world up until this point? I think it would be much easier to try to list the things that philosophy has not affected in our world. But you can think of philosophy as a tool that societies have used throughout all ages to try to find a more or less reasonable answer to important questions of life, questions that aren't necessarily black and white. I can't stress this point enough. Philosophy affects every single part of our world. For instance, in medicine, the ideas that we hold philosophically about the importance of human life largely impact the things that doctors are legally allowed to do, the lengths that they're allowed to go to save a human life. The very idea that all children should be provided with a free education, something that we're so familiar with and just take for granted in America, isn't so much a fact of life as it is a philosophical idea. The fact that you get to enjoy a free public education is the result of philosophy. So hopefully I provided you with some sort of reason to pursue this course, to understand philosophy and logic. But I want to take a quick moment and talk about classical education. There used to be something called the trivium. So what's the trivium? In classical education, there is a certain path that students take in their learning. First, in their elementary school years, we fill them with facts and knowledge, things like multiplication tables and basic math. We teach them the difference between animal and fungi, kind of the stuff that you guys are doing right now. But after we do that and we show them the basics of our language and grammar, they spend their middle school years learning logic, being able to understand critical thinking, being able to clearly reason through problems and deal with complicated arguments. And they spend 3 or 4 years of doing that. And then afterwards, in their high school years, they'll learn the art of rhetoric, which is really just the art of persuading, using language effectively to get your point across or to make someone agree with you. I believe wholeheartedly that if you would spend a little bit of your time in your middle school and high school years pursuing logic and rhetoric, you will come out heads and shoulders above your peers, that you will be more prepared for college, more suited for a job. So if you manage to follow along through this, I do want to encourage you and say these first 2 lessons are a little bit of history and background knowledge so that we can talk about some of the deeper things. But getting into the 3rd, 4th, and the subsequent lessons after that, you're going to find that you're learning actual principles, that you're going to learn which arguments are correct, which arguments are wrong, and why they're wrong. And I don't want to get too much into how you're going to do that, but just be aware that you're going to be learning practical things. Just keep that in mind and don't give up on me. I'll see you in our next lecture. Have a great day.